The way you've described the potential for future crime and disruption, Brian, has been the coming storm. That's been a title of one of your campaign videos that wrapped up things like drug trafficking, behavioral health, and the legislation that we just discussed. The storm is coming is a statement you've made in campaign videos and appearances. It's also a statement that's associated with the QAnon movement, which is a complex of far-right conspiracy theories that promote the ideas that liberal elites are preying on children to maintain their power. Did you seek to appeal to people, to voters who might hold that belief system when you put together that campaign strategy?
Absolutely not. I think it's laughable because I don't follow the QAnon. I hadn't even heard of it until just in the last year or so. And somebody put out an article accusing me of some different things, and I actually had to Google it to see what it even was. I wasn't even familiar with it. Really, the storm, that analogy it's that of a storm. I mean, what we just saw happen in Florida is as a hurricane is building, in the southern regions, and it's moving forward to the mainlands, is you have to say, you're tracking it, you're trying to see what's happening. What's going to be the impact when it hits shore? And I look at that as the impact of the influx of dangerous drugs, fentanyl, coming up from the southern borders. What is it we're really going to see? But here, just in the last fall, we saw big seizures. Wenatchee PD in November had a 1,500 pill seizure, and then in January, the task force had one, and then we had a 10,000 pill seizure, and then we started seeing the emergency service calls where they were having homeless camp, and they'd have 7 fentanyl-related overdose in a weekend, and the numbers were increasing. And I started talking with the coroner and tracking and to see what was happening. That storm that we're talking about we know it's coming. We just don't know what the strength of it is.
Useful metaphor.
Just right. Yeah, I had no idea actually until you said that that was something they do. I don't follow those guys.
Well, Brian, there's been reporting on internal surveys in the sheriff's office that where some of the responses were highly critical of the way the administration handled individual officers' cases, instances of harassment, abusive language, even allegations of career sabotage between deputies, and not just deputies, but supervisors toward deputies. So how seriously do you take these issues, and how do you cure them if you're reelected?
That is the million-dollar question. And first of all, what I want our viewers to know is that culture survey was actually implemented by myself and my command staff several years back because, hey, let's face it, we're dealing with people, and sometimes, things come up with personalities and relationships, and so trying to manage those, that we're treating each other fairly and respectfully is important. So we identified that, but I want to tell our viewers some of the numbers here, and I'm going to read it so I don't get them wrong. But when they did the culture survey, 76% really believe that support the direction that I'm taking the team and that our team is supporting. But they had 53 commissioned staff at the time, and at the time the survey was taken, only 37 of those staff participated in the survey. And when analyzing the responses to all 19 questions on the survey, on average, only 13 of the 37 staff responded negatively to any question. It's when you look at those type of things, they said, one, it was important to us. We are the one that created and implemented it, and we wanted to hear from our people. And then we put a team together that are the staff themselves to say, let's identify what are the top, pieces here that we need to go after, prioritize them, and we can start plucking away on those one by one. And let's get the easy ones off. Let's identify the hard ones. Let's go with that. Myself as sheriff, is one of the biggest lessons I've learned is communication. Leadership, they're always going to tell you that in your training. You can't over-communicate, but make sure it's important and necessary. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons.
2 times that you've found it necessary, in your view, to dismiss a deputy. Deputy Jennifer Tyler and Sergeant Mike Harris were those 2. Both of those individuals came back with federal lawsuits related to their dismissal. By my count, Brian, the county or its insurance pool has had to pay about $1.82 million, 1.82 in those 2 cases. What did you learn from those outcomes about how to manage your deputies?
A lot of that comes at the supervisor level. Have we prepared our supervisors to train documentation? Because it's called progressive discipline. You've got to show to the courts, to the arbitrator, that you did progressive discipline when you get into termination, or even potentially days off without pay, right? Those are some of the more serious potential disciplinary actions. And so, and I'm saying, let's document the little things, be willing to take the feedback and learn and grow from that. Because if we don't document the little things and you fight that in a hearing every time that somebody sits down and writes your annual review board and says you need to improve on this, then how are we going to set ourselves up for success in the future? Because there's no documentation for progressive discipline. And so, and I also need to remind the viewers that, Jennifer Tyler was terminated twice, once by myself, but once previously by the previous sheriff.
But let's be clear, the Douglas County jury did find that in favor of Deputy Tyler and that she was a victim of retaliation. And that was the basis for their...
And looking back on that, we went back and tried to figure out why, because we were very confident that we were in the right on that. We still believe we were in the right on that. But we had a supervisor that had actually had cut Jennifer Tyler out of some emails, and it wasn't to our knowledge until a later date. That employee actually ended up being coach and counsel disciplined through that, but we think that played a big part on the discriminatory part of that as well. So,
Brian, back in mid-September, you and your wife attended the Reawaken America tour in Post Falls, Idaho. Your campaign posted about this on your Facebook page. This is a large touring event. People who were associated with former President Trump, like Mike Lindell, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, appear at these. It promotes a kind of Christian politics for America. And it's also heavily tied in with the false claim, I want to be clear that it's a false claim, that the 2020 presidential election was unlawful. Do you believe that Joe Biden is the lawfully elected president of the United States?
I don't think it matters what I believe, Jefferson. I think we have a process in place until somebody can come in and prove that. I don't have the evidence to do that. I've seen documentaries and asked people email me stuff all the time as the sheriff to say, hey, can you watch this? I've watched the 20,000 Mules to say that there is some major concern in voter integrity, and I think we need to put those things in place. But I don't think I have the knowledge or the ability to say whether or not Joe Biden's not the lawfully elected president. Because
What's the question of your belief, though?
I think there's some serious integrity issues, and I don't know what that vote count is. And I know that there's some things in place that would question to say we need to do some things in the future to make sure that there's voter integrity so we never have to question this in the first place. I don't think that we have an election integrity issue here in Chelan County, and I don't have the ability to know firsthand what that is across the nation. But I do believe that there are things that need to be held accountable and said, what's the level of that? I have no idea.
So you believe that the Chelan County election process is fair and lawful?
I do. I've known Skip Moore for a long time, and I think he's to be a very integral person that puts every bit of his effort in there. I really didn't know what the Reawaken
America tour.
We weren't familiar with that. I went online. There was a person that my wife was interested in hearing speak that we thought was on the list was Charlie Kirk. And then I was interested in actually hearing General Flynn speak. We went over, ended up going for the afternoon. Didn't get to hear either one of them. Charlie Kirk wasn't there. I think we showed up about 3:30. We stayed till about 7, and we have some friends that live in Post Falls that used to live here in town. I went over and spent the evening with them, and then we went and attended the event in Hayden. So it was really pretty uneventful. But did a live interview with the prior Representative Matt Shea from Patriot Radio, and just talking about the legislative changes.
Brian, Matt Shea, who you bring up, is a former state representative from Spokane Valley, a Republican who was censured by his colleagues and found by the State House of Representatives to have, quote, participated in an act of domestic terrorism. So I guess my question, Brian, is why do an interview, even if it's on a subject dear to your heart, with a person of that caliber?
Somebody had introduced me to Matt while we were there and said, hey, he's interested in interviewing you because I'm the Washington State Sheriff's Association president. And we chatted a little bit. He said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" We were talking about the legislative reform and the different things that were coming out and some of the challenges we were facing. He said, "Would you be interested in doing an interview on those topics?" And I said, "Absolutely. I'd love to get my message out." So it wasn't about who I'm doing the interview with. It's about what the message I'm getting out. And so anything I can do, because as we were talking earlier in this interview, said, "Well, don't you think it's just time to move on?" No, I think it's time to tell people the truth and what I do. And I'm going to continue to beat that drum on legislative reform and where we need to try to recover from that in the future. So the audience that I can get to listen to me, and I'll talk on, I'll get an interpreter and talk on the Spanish radio station if we can get that message out. I'm not a Matt Shea follower. I just know that he was a previous state representative, and he.
You were aware of his background when you sat down for the interview?
Slightly. I knew there was some things in his background that had been challenged, but I really hadn't followed him. I didn't know detailed what they were.
So in May 2020, Brian, you submitted a declaration in the lawsuit to overturn Governor Inslee's emergency orders surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. You said in your declaration, quote, "I do not believe Chelan and/or Douglas counties are in an emergency situation, specifically in regards to COVID-19. You also helped to gather some written statements from others for use in that lawsuit. At that time, in May 2020, 6 people in Chelan County had died of COVID-19. A year later, that number was 66 people, and today the number is 184 people in Chelan County have died of COVID-19. How do you feel in retrospect about having signed on to that effort, having seen now how serious the pandemic became for the Wenatchee Valley?
Well, the specific part that we're talking about there is the emergency declaration. Was in the emergency declaration, they were talking about the impact that it was going to have to our health facilities. Remember, they set up the emergency field hospitals and stuff, and we didn't see the impact to those. That's specifically what we were talking to about. As far as we're not trying to claim that there wasn't an issue as far as a health concern. That's not what I was trying to indicate at all. What we're trying to say is the emergency that they were claiming and for the emergency declaration didn't fit when we got into months later. Because remember, this is going to be a 2-week shutdown, and then it was something we extended and extended and extended. So as we looked at that, that was the concern was wait, the declaration doesn't fit on what the original one was. And so we're saying that emergency didn't exist in the way that they had described it. That's really what my letter was about.
Would you have done things differently, though, seeing how things panned out since then?
No, I don't think so. No.
Sheriff Brian Burnett, 3-term sheriff of Chelan County, running as a Republican for a 4th term. Thanks a lot for coming in.
Thank you, Jefferson.
You're watching the NCWLIFE channel.